Now it's time for Culture Talk. This is the segment where we talk about culturally relevant topics that you can use to start conversations about your faith. And I'm joined today with philosopher and theologian Kenneth Samples. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, Sandra.
We're going to be talking about a very light subject. Just kidding. We're going to be talking about why God would allow plagues. So we know the Bible tells of plagues that befell certain populations, everything from locusts and boils and the killing of the firstborn sons. You know, a skeptic would rightly ask, if God is all loving, why would he allow plagues to befall humanity?
Well, it's not an easy question to answer, to be perfectly candid. I think when you look at the context, the Israelites have been taken captive by the Egyptians, so the Jewish people are enslaved. Through his prophet, Yahweh tells Moses to go to the Pharaoh, let my people go. He refuses. The Pharaoh is seen as a living God. So I think the way to understand the plagues and that the series of judgments that befall the Egyptians is that God is sending a message to not just the Egyptian people and the Pharaoh, but he's sending a message even to the broader pagan deities that I'm the true and living God. And it's expressing his disfavor and his judgment. And I think to remember the plan is to take the Jews out of bondage, to give them the law. So these are really the important points of the Old Testament, the Exodus, the giving of the law. And then long term, a Messiah is going to come out of those Jewish people.
So for today's reader, as we're looking at these plagues, what is it that we are to glean as far as the purpose, God's purpose in these plagues and why it relates to us today?
Yeah, I think there's a line in the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe where it's said of Aslan, he's good, but he's not safe. God is perfectly loving. God is omnibelevolent. I like to say he's unsurpassingly good. But with goodness and love is justice. And so this is a sign that God will punish rebellion. And I think that's something to keep in mind. I mean, what is it that rescues us from the just wrath of God? It's the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. So it takes a lot to save us. And therefore, I don't think we should minimize the wrath of God. But God's not loving if he's not just. And he's not just if he's not also loving and good. So I think we need to see that in its broadest context.
Right. I think I like what you said there, that God isn't just if he isn't loving, and he isn't loving if he isn't just. And we think of justice systems and what that might look like as a loving expression. Of course, now as people, we corrupt it. So a skeptic might wonder, when you're talking about God's wrath, I think it might be hard to wrap one's head around the idea that God would get angry. You know, a loving God would get angry and have wrath and have judgment. So how can you engage in a conversation when someone asks that question, not to like poke and prod, but really out of a genuine curiosity?
Well, I think one angle that needs to be looked at very carefully is the language about God that we receive is really oftentimes anthropomorphic. So when it talks about God being wrathful or God being emotional or I'm a jealous God, I think we have to recognize that God is an infinite, eternal, personal, divine individual. And with the Trinity, one God in three persons. So I don't think we want to think of that as, well, God's throwing a fit and he's just expressing anger in a reckless type of way. I think we want to understand that to sin against God, it isn't so much the particular sin or even how long you sin. I mean, sometimes people say, I don't get the calculus of the Bible. I sin for 70 years, I get punished for eternity. How's that work? I would say, remember who you're sinning against. You're sinning against the Lord God Almighty. You're sinning against the God who brought all things into existence. you're sinning against a God that's perfectly loving, perfectly holy, perfectly just. I think there is an awe-inspiring element in all of that. So I wouldn't want people to think of it as God's reacting emotionally.
Right, like throwing a tantrum almost.
There you
right?
go. That's the right word.
Well, I think that might help in a conversation with someone who's genuinely curious, but surely they're going to want to know more. So what are some points that you would recommend to Christians who are going to engage in these sorts of conversations from a skeptic who's wondering about plagues and about an angry God? Like, what are some main takeaways that you would encourage them to press into?
Yeah, I think I would draw people to this, Sandra, that Christians worship God, and we worship God because he has all of these perfections. He is a being that is completely maximally good. God is perfectly holy, perfectly loving. God has all these qualities of infinity. And I think that's the reason that we reasonably worship the Lord God. And again, I think I'd want to bring people back to the idea that Aslan's good, but he's not safe. There is a sense about God that he's different than mere human beings.
Right. Well, and I think for those who aren't familiar, that Aslan is a Christ-like character in the Chronicles of Narnia that C.S. Lewis wrote. Right. So yeah, I think that's an important, really, analogy that C.S. Lewis uses in talking about Christ and his character.
Right.
Thank you so much for that, Ken. If you would like to hear more from Ken Samples, go to reasons.org and search for his blog, Reflections.